The midsummer sun beat down on the city like a relentless furnace, turning sidewalks into hot plates and trapping the air in a suffocating stillness. Hunter Briner sat slumped on a cracked wooden bench beneath a withering tree, his shirt clinging to his back, his thoughts heavy with regret. This was his third day without shelter. His backpack, a worn-out thing stuffed with his last few possessions, rested beside him like a monument to everything he had lost. Just a year ago, Hunter had been a respected trauma nurse at one of the best private hospitals in the city. At 32, he had a promising career, a decent apartment, and a future. But that future had shattered overnight. One critical patient had died, and the hospital, desperate to avoid liability, blamed Hunter. The administration twisted the facts, silenced internal complaints, and labeled him negligent. No lawyer would take his case without a fortune he did not have. Then his father fell gravely ill. In desperation, Hunter sold his apartment to pay for his father's treatment. The operation failed. The funeral left him penniless, jobless, alone, no friends, no family, no one willing to believe his side of the story. He was invisible now, until today. He looked at the paper in his hand, an address in a wealthy neighborhood. The man who lived there, Graham Silverton, had once been his father's closest friend. His father, ever proud, never reached out for help, but just before dying he wrote a letter. A desperate plea to the one person who might care. And now, Hunter, sunburned and hollow-eyed, was going to hand-deliver it. He glanced at his reflection in a small pocket mirror. Gaunt face, sunken cheeks. But his sharp hazel eyes were still alert, still fighting. He wiped his forehead, stood up, and walked toward the nearest bus stop, pocketing the last of his change. He would make it to Maple Street if it was the last thing he did. He did not want pity. He did not want handouts. He wanted one chance to rise again. One conversation that might rewrite everything. Maple Street stood in quiet contrast to the chaos Hunter Briner had grown used to. Clean sidewalks, trimmed hedges, polished gates that whispered of lives untouched by despair. He hesitated outside the tall iron fence of the Silverton estate, clutching the wrinkled letter his father had written before passing. The gates opened silently as if expecting him, and Hunter stepped into another world. The mansion loomed like something out of a different life, one he could barely imagine now. Graham Silverton answered the door himself. Tall, silver-haired, and radiating quiet authority, he studied Hunter with cool detachment. "You're Nicholas Briner's son," he said, more statement than question. "He was a good man." Hunter's voice was rough. "He wrote to you before he died. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go." Graham's jaw tightened. He took the letter but said nothing for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." The inside of the estate was regal but lived in. Graham poured a drink without offering one and finally said, "I do not owe you anything, but I do owe your father some respect. I'm short on nurses. My father, Henry, needs full-time care. You have medical experience. Work here, and we'll see where that leads." The words were clipped, transactional, but for Hunter, they were a lifeline. If you believe in second chances and the power of truth, comment yes below and hit that subscribe button, because this story is just getting started. Hunter accepted without hesitation. That night, he was shown to a guest room, its walls lined with old photographs and polished furniture. For the first time in months, he slept in a real bed, sheets clean, air cool. But something felt off. The house was too quiet, too heavy. The portraits of Graham's daughter, Catherine, hung in every hallway, always the same smile, the same distant eyes. She had died in an accident, Graham had said, but something about the way he avoided her name sparked a flicker of curiosity in Hunter's gut. This was supposed to be a job, a second chance. But as Hunter stared out into the darkened garden, a question began to form. What if he had walked into something far more complicated than he realized? Hunter's days quickly settled into a rhythm. Early mornings, tending to the gruff but sharp-eyed Henry Silverton, followed by quiet afternoons wandering the echoing halls of the estate. Graham remained distant, always cloaked in business calls and unreadable expressions, but the mansion spoke louder than its master. Every room whispered of Catherine, his only daughter, whose portrait smiled from every corner like a ghost frozen in time. Supposedly dead, a tragic car accident. But even tragedy has a smell, and something about this one didn't sit right with Hunter. On his third day, while organizing Henry's medication, he noticed a strange item tucked behind old files in a locked cabinet, a hospital band labeled Odora Palmer. The name rang like a distant bell. That night, sleep eluded him. He sat in the guest room, flipping through an old hospital roster saved on his cracked phone. The name hit him hard. Odora had been a patient at the psychiatric clinic where he briefly worked after being blacklisted. Quiet, always sedated, no visitors, no history. She was kept away from the others, treated more like a secret than a patient, and now the puzzle began to click. The scar above her eyebrow, her pale blue eyes, almost identical to the ones in Catherine's portraits. When he mentioned the name to Graham at breakfast, the man's fork froze midair. A flicker of something, shock, fear, passed across his face, but he covered it quickly. "Never heard of her," he said, voice calm but hollow. Hunter let the moment pass, but his instincts screamed otherwise. That evening, in a locked wing of the house, he discovered Catherine's room preserved exactly as it was. Clothes neatly folded, her diary on the nightstand, photos half-developed on the desk. No parent would keep such a shrine for a daughter long gone, unless she was not gone at all. Hunter didn't know where this path would lead, but something dark was buried beneath the Silverton family's grief. Catherine hadn't vanished by accident. He could feel it. And if Odora and Catherine were the same person, someone had gone to great lengths to hide her. Hunter wasn't just a caregiver anymore. He was a witness, and soon he would become the one person standing between truth and those willing to destroy it. The wind howled against the windows of the East Wing as Hunter crept through the corridor with his phone flashlight guiding the way. Something in Catherine's room had bothered him for days. The drawer beneath her desk. It had been locked, sealed tight with an antique keyhole that no one seemed to have the key for. But that night, while helping Henry with his evening tea, the old man had whispered something strange. "If you want the truth, check the mahogany chest. Catherine kept everything important there." It was the first time Henry had mentioned her by name. Hunter returned to the room just past midnight. After 15 minutes of careful work, with a slim screwdriver and sheer resolve, the drawer clicked open. Inside was a slim, leather-bound diary. Its pages shook in his hands as he read. Catherine had documented everything. How she had uncovered embezzlement and insider trading within her father's company. She had suspected Alex Granger and Anthony Martin, Graham's closest partners, of laundering millions through fake contracts. When she brought her findings to Graham, he dismissed it. Days later, she began receiving threats. And then, silence. No entries, just blank pages. Hunter knew she never made it to the authorities. Her accident happened the week after the last entry. And now, with chilling clarity, he saw the picture. Catherine had not died. She had been silenced. He returned to his room in a daze, only to find a missed call from Megan, a former colleague from the psychiatric clinic. He called her back immediately, heart pounding. "That girl, Odora," he said. "You still remember her?" Megan hesitated, then whispered, "She wasn't right, Hunter. Too calm, too quiet. They kept her isolated. She looked like someone who had forgotten she used to matter." Hunter's voice cracked. "She did. Her name is Catherine Silverton." Everything was falling into place, too clean, too calculated. Whoever hid her did not just want silence. They wanted erasure. And now, they were dangerously close to getting away with it. Hunter stared at the dark hall outside his room, pulse racing. This was no longer about redemption for him. It was about justice for a woman who had once screamed into the void, and now had someone ready to scream back. The cabin was barely visible through the trees, buried deep in a thicket of pine, surrounded by silence too deliberate to be natural. Hunter crouched beside Graham in the underbrush, the early morning fog clinging to their clothes as they studied the building. It was small, unassuming, but something about it felt wrong. Hunter's gut twisted. According to Megan, this was where Catherine, disguised as Odora, had last been transferred. She was supposed to be getting extended treatment. In reality, it was a prison wrapped in a medical lie. The plan had to be clean. Graham had managed to disable the security system by accessing a backdoor code from an old company contractor. Hunter would enter from the rear, Graham from the front, both armed with only what they could carry and nerves forged from desperation. As Hunter slipped inside, the cabin smelled like antiseptic and fear. The rooms were dim, windows blacked out, and in one of them, strapped to a bed with IVs and restraints, was Catherine. She was pale, eyes sunken, hair matted, but she was alive. When she saw Hunter, something flickered behind her exhaustion. Recognition. He moved quickly, unhooking the lines and whispering her name. She tried to speak but could barely muster a sound. Graham entered moments later, stunned at the sight of his daughter, tears slipping silently down his face. But they were not alone. A guard burst in from the hallway, armed and shouting. Hunter reacted without thinking, tackling him to the ground. The two men struggled, fists and elbows colliding in the narrow space. Graham grabbed a metal rod and brought it down hard, ending the fight with finality. Silence returned, shattered, messy, but victorious. As they carried Catherine to the car, she clutched Hunter's arm with weak fingers and whispered, "I knew someone would come. I just didn't know who." In that moment, Hunter realized this was no longer about repaying his father's debt or rebuilding his reputation. This was bigger. He was saving someone who had been buried alive by lies. And those who orchestrated it were still out there, watching, ready to protect their secrets. But now they had a problem. Catherine was awake, and she remembered everything. Catherine's return shattered the illusion of the Silverton empire overnight. The press exploded with questions, the company's board members scrambled, and Graham's once trusted partners, Alex Granger and Anthony Martin, went dark. But Graham was done playing blind. With Catherine now safe in the estate's guest wing and slowly recovering from months of drug-induced fog, she provided details only someone who had lived it could. Names, passwords, a hidden laptop stashed in a false panel beneath the cabin floor. On it, a trove of financial records, proof of money laundering, falsified contracts, and offshore accounts, all tied to Alex and Anthony. With Hunter's help, Graham arranged a meeting with Colonel Wells, a stern, sharp-eyed military investigator with jurisdiction over high-level corporate crimes. Hunter watched silently as Catherine sat across from the colonel and, with a trembling but determined voice, recounted everything. The manipulation, the threats, the moment she realized her father's closest friends were ready to erase her for profit. Colonel Wells said little but nodded when she finished. "We'll handle the rest." That night, Hunter sat with Catherine on the back patio. Her strength was returning, slowly. She was no longer the pale, sedated girl he had found. She was the woman her enemies had tried to silence. "Do you ever wonder why it was me?" he asked. "Why I found you, not someone else?" Catherine smiled faintly. "Maybe it had to be someone like you. Someone they underestimated, just like me." 2 weeks later, Granger and Martin were arrested during a board meeting. Graham faced the press, not with spin, but with transparency. The Silverton name was battered, but not broken. Catherine was officially reinstated as the company's vice president. And Hunter, he received more than thanks. Graham offered him a permanent role, head of internal ethics and compliance, a title with power, a job with purpose. Hunter stood taller now. Not as a fallen nurse, not as a man lost to failure, but as someone who had pulled truth from darkness and given a woman her life back, and in the process, perhaps, reclaimed his own. But beneath all the justice and reunions, one question lingered in the back of his mind. If they were willing to do this to Catherine, who else had they already buried? The Silverton estate was quieter now, the chaos finally behind them, but Hunter Briner knew peace was a fragile thing. Catherine adjusted quickly to her new role as vice president, reclaiming the life that had been stolen from her. She no longer walked like a shadow, but stood tall, commanding rooms with quiet power. Henry Silverton, once distant and cold, began to smile again, his strength returning alongside his granddaughter's recovery. Graham, though greyer and humbled, found purpose in rebuilding what mattered most, his family. And Hunter, who had once slept under bridges and begged for mercy, now sat at the head of a conference table as the newly appointed head of internal compliance. Yet despite the accolades, the praise, the second chance, something inside him remained restless. One evening, as he packed up for the night, an email pinged on his screen. No subject line, no signature, just a string of coordinates and a chilling message. She wasn't the only one. Hunter froze. Another victim, another cover-up. He stared at the screen, heart pounding, then looked out the office window where Catherine stood in the garden, her face bathed in golden dusk. What they had uncovered had nearly destroyed them. But what if it was only the beginning? If you followed Hunter's journey from betrayal to justice, from shadows to purpose, and want to uncover what lies ahead, drop a comment, hit yes below, and subscribe. Because this story isn't over, it's just the start of something much bigger.